It was a bright afternoon when a woman named Danielle Brooks walked into a luxury clothing store in the heart of the city. She wore a simple black shirt, jeans, and old sneakers. Her hair was tied back, and she carried a small bag over her shoulder. There was nothing flashy about her. No jewelry, no designer purse, no loud makeup. But there was something calm and strong in the way she walked. She stopped near the front window and looked at a dress on display. It was long, red, and beautiful, the kind of dress people dream of wearing to fancy events. Danielle smiled softly. Then she stepped inside. The moment she entered, the mood changed. Behind the counter stood the store manager, Brian, a tall white man in his 40s. His smile faded the second he saw her. He quickly glanced at her shoes, then at her clothes, then looked away with a smirk. He leaned over to a young salesgirl and whispered loudly, "She's not buying anything. Probably just here to waste time." Danielle heard it, but she said nothing. She walked over to a rack of jackets and began to browse. Her fingers moved carefully over the fabrics. She didn't rush. She was studying every detail. One customer, a rich-looking woman in heels, came over and stood beside her. The woman smiled and said, "You have great taste. That jacket is lovely." Danielle smiled back. "Yes, it's beautifully made." But before they could talk more, Brian rushed over and stepped between them. "Excuse me," he said, turning to Danielle. "Please don't touch too many items. They're very expensive." Danielle looked at him calmly. "I'm just looking, like everyone else." Brian folded his arms. "Yes, well, we don't usually get browsers. People come here to shop. If you're not planning to buy, I suggest you leave." A few other customers turned their heads. The store went quiet. The young salesgirl looked uncomfortable. The rich woman who had just complimented Danielle slowly stepped away. Danielle remained still. Her face showed no anger, just quiet strength. She looked Brian in the eyes and said, "Are you treating me this way because of how I look?" Brian scoffed. "No, I treat all customers the same, but let's be honest, you don't look like our usual crowd." Danielle let out a small breath. Then she pulled out her phone and made a quick call. She said only a few words. "Yes, I'm at the downtown store. Activate the full staff meeting. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Brian blinked. "Excuse me? Are you threatening me with some complaint?" "Do whatever you want, lady. You're not the first." Danielle ended the call and looked around the store one last time. Then she turned to leave. As she walked out, the door closed softly behind her, but the tension in the store remained. Brian rolled his eyes and said to the salesgirl, "Some people just don't know their place." The salesgirl didn't respond. She was too busy staring at the door, thinking. Outside, Danielle walked down the street, her phone still in her hand. She looked calm, but her mind was sharp. This wasn't the first time someone had judged her, but it might be the last time someone did it in her own store. Backstory flash, soft emotional reveal. Danielle wasn't just any woman walking into a boutique. She was a self-made businesswoman. 10 years ago, she had started a small fashion stall in a flea market. She sold handmade scarves and jackets. People loved her designs, not just because they were beautiful, but because they made people feel powerful. She worked day and night, built her brand, and grew her company. Now, she quietly owned a chain of luxury fashion stores across the country. But most people didn't know that. Danielle believed in staying humble. She never showed off her wealth. She let her work speak for itself. And today, she had come to this store unannounced, to see how her staff treated everyday people. Now, she had her answer. Back inside the store, Brian bragged to another customer about removing troublemakers. He laughed, clearly proud of himself. But the salesgirl, her name was Maria, pulled out her phone and quietly searched something. She typed, "Danielle Brooks, fashion CEO." Her eyes widened. A photo popped up. It was Danielle, wearing the same simple outfit, standing in front of a row of stores with her name on them. Maria whispered, "Oh no." Brian noticed her staring. "What are you doing? Don't tell me you're feeling sorry for that woman." Maria didn't say a word. She just showed him the phone screen. Brian's face turned pale. On the screen, Danielle Brooks, founder and CEO of Brooks Luxury Fashions, the same company they worked for. Brian stuttered, "This must be a mistake." But Maria shook her head. "She's the owner, Brian. You just humiliated the owner." Brian stood there, frozen for a moment, staring at the phone screen that Maria had shown him. The words on the screen seemed to blur, but there was no mistaking the truth. The woman he had just humiliated was the owner of the entire store chain, Danielle Brooks. His heart began to race. His breath grew heavier. He treated her like some poor, unworthy customer. And now he had no idea how to fix this. The humiliation was eating at him from the inside. He quickly glanced around the store. The employees were still standing quietly, watching him with nervous eyes. They had all heard the confrontation earlier. They had seen his rude behavior. "You wait," Brian muttered, trying to gather his thoughts. This can't be real. There must be some mistake." Maria didn't respond. She just turned away from him and began helping another customer, trying to act as though nothing had happened. But deep down, she knew things were about to change, and they were going to change fast. Meanwhile, across the city, Danielle had walked back to her car with a calm expression, though inside, she felt a storm brewing. She had known that Brian was rude to some customers, but she hadn't realized just how bad it had gotten. She knew people like him existed, the kind who believed their position gave them power over others. He had assumed she didn't belong in his store just because she didn't look like the usual rich customer. And now she had the chance to teach him a lesson. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her assistant. "Danielle, are you sure about this? The meeting? It might cause a stir." Danielle smiled to herself. She had been testing her staff at this store for months, but she hadn't expected it to go this far. She typed back quickly, "I'm sure. It's time we take action. He needs to learn. Everyone needs to learn." She put her phone down and focused on the road ahead. Back at the store, Brian was pacing behind the counter, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do now? He quickly tried to cover up his mistake by texting his friends, calling other employees, and begging them to pretend they hadn't seen anything. But deep down, he knew this was no ordinary mistake. One of the young employees, Samantha, spoke up. "Brian, we need to fix this. We can't just pretend it didn't happen." He turned to her, his face flushed. "What do you mean, fix it? I'm the manager here. This is my store." Samantha shook her head. "It's our store, Brian. It's Danielle's store, and she's the boss. You've got to apologize." Brian's pride took a hit. He hadn't thought about it that way. He couldn't believe he'd let his ego get in the way. He'd been rude, disrespectful, and unprofessional. All for what? To prove a point to a woman he'd assumed was beneath him. But now, the weight of what he'd done was too much to ignore. Later that afternoon, the store was quieter now. The usual hustle and bustle had slowed down, and most of the customers had left. The staff was anxiously waiting, whispering to one another about what would happen next. Word had spread like wildfire. Danielle was the owner. The woman they had all been rude to was their boss. Brian stood by the back door, looking out at the parking lot. He didn't know what to expect. Would Danielle show up, angry and ready to fire him? Would she call the corporate office and have him replaced? He didn't have to wait long. A sleek black car pulled into the lot. It was Danielle. She stepped out of the car with confidence, dressed in a business suit that made her look powerful yet approachable. As she walked towards the store, heads turned. Brian swallowed hard. He had to fix this. He had to make things right. Inside the store, Danielle entered the store slowly, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The staff stood in a semicircle, nervous but eager to see how things would unfold. Danielle took a deep breath as she looked around. She made eye contact with each employee, giving them a small nod. Brian was waiting for her by the counter. His hands were shaking, and his face was pale. "Danielle," he started, but his voice was weak. He cleared his throat, trying to regain some control. I owe you an apology." Danielle raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. She simply stood there, waiting for him to continue. Brian's face grew redder. "I was wrong. I misjudged you, and I treated you terribly. I was wrong to think that you didn't belong here. I didn't know who you were, and I shouldn't have said those things. Please forgive me." There was a long pause. Danielle stood still, her eyes cold but calm. She studied him carefully, as though measuring his sincerity. Finally, she spoke. "You're right. You didn't know who I was. But that's not the point. The point is, you judged me because of how I look. You assumed I couldn't afford anything. You assumed I was just another problem customer." Brian opened his mouth to speak, but she raised a hand to stop him. "No," Danielle continued. "That's the problem. People like you make others feel less than they are. You humiliated me, but more importantly, you humiliated everyone who's ever been judged because of their appearance." The store went silent. No one dared to speak. Danielle's eyes softened just slightly. "I believe in second chances, Brian, but you need to prove to me, and to everyone here, that you've learned." The hours passed slowly after Danielle left the store, and the staff remained on edge. The silence between them was thick. The weight of what had happened hung in the air, making everyone feel uneasy. They had seen it all: the argument, the humiliation, and the shocking revelation about Danielle's true identity. Now, they were all wondering the same thing. What would happen next? Brian paced behind the counter, his hands rubbing against his face. He couldn't shake the feeling of embarrassment that had settled deep in his stomach. He had made a huge mistake, and now he had to figure out how to fix it. But how could he? Danielle was the owner of the store, and she had every right to fire him. He knew that. But there was something else. As much as he hated to admit it, there was a part of him that respected her, her calm, her strength, the way she had stood there without saying a word, making him squirm. She wasn't just a rich woman with a lot of power. She was someone who had earned everything she had. And maybe, just maybe, he had underestimated her, just like he had underestimated so many others in his life. Still, he couldn't let go of his pride. He had been in charge of the store for years. He wasn't going to let one woman take it all away. He was going to make things right, somehow. He just needed time. But time was something Brian didn't have. The next morning, Danielle walked into the store the following morning, but this time there was no calm confidence in her steps. This time she was ready to take charge, and her presence filled the room with an energy that everyone could feel. The staff, who had been quietly waiting for the day to pass, straightened up as soon as they saw her. They knew this was it, the moment when everything would change. Danielle had made it clear the day before that she wasn't going to let things slide. She wasn't going to sit back and watch her store go down because of one rude manager. Brian was already there, nervously glancing at the clock. He knew she would show up at any moment, and he had no idea what to expect. Would she fire him on the spot? Would she bring in someone else to replace him? He had no idea. But when Danielle entered, he didn't see the anger he expected. Instead, she was calm, composed, and ready for action. "Good morning, everyone," Danielle said, her voice strong but warm. "I hope you're all ready for a fresh start." The employees exchanged looks, unsure of what she meant. They had expected her to make some grand speech about firing Brian or taking over the store herself. But instead, she seemed to be focused on something else. "Brian," she said, turning toward him, "I need to talk to you." Brian's heart skipped a beat. This was it. He knew that everything he had done, Everything he had tried to ignore had led to this moment. He had no choice but to face it now. He walked over to her, swallowing the lump in his throat. He tried to speak, but his words caught in his chest. "I know," he said quietly. "I've messed up. I should have never treated you that way. I'm sorry." Danielle nodded slowly. "I appreciate your apology, Brian, but we both know that saying sorry isn't enough. You've hurt not only me but also your team. Your behavior yesterday set a terrible example for everyone here." Brian nodded, guilt weighing heavily on his shoulders. "I know. I'm sorry. I was wrong, and I realize that now." Danielle studied him for a moment, her gaze piercing. "I'm giving you a chance, Brian. But you need to prove to me that you can change. You need to show everyone here that you can lead with respect, not fear. That means no more mocking customers, no more judging people based on how they look or what they wear. Do you understand?" Brian's throat tightened, but he nodded. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes." Danielle gave a small smile, her eyes softening just slightly. "Good. I'm glad you're willing to make things right. But let me be clear, this is your last chance. If you mess up again, there will be no second chances." Brian swallowed hard. "I won't let you down." Danielle turned toward the staff, who were watching the exchange with quiet interest. "Now, I want to make some changes. I'm not just here to fix things with Brian. I'm here to fix the entire culture of this store. We will treat every customer with respect, no matter their appearance, their background, or how much money they have. That's how we will build trust, and that's how we will grow." The staff nodded, some of them looking relieved, others still uncertain. But one thing was clear: Danielle wasn't just talking the talk. She was ready to walk the walk. She turned back to Brian. "And you, Ryan, you're going to be part of that change. You'll start by leading by example. You'll be the one who sets the tone. And I expect you to work with me, not against me." Brian looked at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "I'll do it. I'll change." A few days later. The days that followed were not easy for Brian. He had to swallow his pride every single day. He had to apologize to customers he treated poorly, and he had to learn how to lead with kindness instead of arrogance. It was hard. It felt unnatural at first, but slowly things began to change. The staff began to warm up to him again, and Danielle's influence started to ripple through the store. But there was one more surprise in store for everyone. One morning, Brian received an unexpected call. It was from the corporate office. "We've heard a lot of good things about your improvements, Brian," the voice on the other end said. "But we think you need a little more training before we can let you take on more responsibility." Brian's heart sank. "What kind of training?" "We think you benefit from leadership training, the kind that focuses on humility and respect. We've scheduled you for a program next month. It's mandatory." Brian's stomach twisted. This was it. He had to prove that he was capable of change, that he could be a better leader, not just for himself, but for the entire store. The pressure was on. But he couldn't back down now. He had come this far. Brian sat at his desk, staring at the email in front of him. His mind was racing. The leadership training session he was scheduled for was less than a week away, and he couldn't stop thinking about what it meant. Could he really change? Could he prove to everyone, especially to Danielle, that he had learned from his mistakes? The phone buzzed on his desk. It was a message from Danielle. She had been in the store every day, overseeing things, watching how the staff interacted with each other and the customers. She was a constant presence now, not just as the owner, but as someone who was truly dedicated to making things right. Brian knew he had to keep up. "Brian, I want to meet with you at 3:00 p.m. today. We need to talk about something important." His stomach flipped. Was this it? Had he not done enough? Was he about to lose everything? Later that afternoon, Brian walked into Danielle's office with his head held low. He had been dreading this meeting all morning. He knew he had been trying to do better, but was it enough? Danielle looked up from her desk as he entered. Her expression was serious but not unkind. She motioned for him to sit down. As he sat across from her, his palms began to sweat. "Brian," she began, her voice steady but firm, "I've been keeping an eye on the store. You've made improvements, but I've noticed something that we need to address." Brian's heart skipped a beat. He had been doing his best, but he knew he hadn't been perfect. Was this where it all fell apart? Danielle continued, "It's not just about how you treat customers. It's about how you treat your team. The staff is looking to you for guidance. They're watching how you interact with them, how you lead. If you don't show them that you respect them, they won't respect you back." Brian's throat tightened. He had always been so focused on getting things done right that he hadn't paid enough attention to how he was making his team feel. He nodded slowly, knowing that she was right. "I've been tough on them," he admitted, "but I thought it was necessary. I thought that's what made me a good manager." Danielle gave him a small, understanding smile. "It's not about being tough, Brian. It's about being fair. It's about being a leader who listens and who values their opinions." He sighed. "I get it. I've been trying, but sometimes I don't know what the right approach is." Danielle leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. "That's why you're going to need more than just the leadership training. I'm going to give you something else, a chance to prove yourself in a bigger way." Brian looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Danielle stood up and walked over to the whiteboard in the corner of the office. She wrote something on it with a marker, then turned back to face him. "I'm giving you a project," she said. "I want you to lead a new initiative for the store. It's going to be a big change, and I want you to be the one to take charge of it." Brian's brow furrowed. "A project? What kind of project?" Danielle smiled, but there was something mysterious in her expression. "It's about customer experience. We're going to transform how we approach our customers, make them feel welcome and valued. You'll work with the staff to come up with new ideas, new ways to engage with customers. You'll lead this, Brian. If you can show me that you've learned what it means to be a true leader, then we can talk about your future here." The weight of her words sank in. A project like that would take time, effort, and careful planning. But it was exactly the kind of challenge he needed. He wasn't just managing the store anymore. He was going to have to change the culture. "I understand," Brian said, standing up from his chair. "I'll give it everything I've got. I won't let you down." Danielle nodded. "Good. You start tomorrow. I expect results, Brian. This is your chance to prove yourself." The next morning, Brian gathered the staff in the break room to explain the new project. As he spoke, he could feel the nervous energy in the room. The employees were unsure. They had seen Brian's rough management style before, and many were skeptical about whether he could truly change. "We're going to make some big changes," Brian began, trying to sound confident. "I've been given the chance to lead a new customer experience initiative, and I need your help to make it work. This is about creating a store where every customer feels like they matter. We're going to listen to them, make sure they have what they need, and build a place where they actually want to come back." There was a moment of silence, and then Maria, one of the senior employees, spoke up. "Are you really serious about this, Brian?" she asked, her tone cautious. "We've heard it before. But the way you treated us, the way you treated the customers, it's hard to believe you've changed." Brian took a deep breath. He could feel the tension in the room, but he knew this was the moment he had to prove himself. "I know I've made mistakes. I know I've treated people wrong. But I'm doing everything I can to fix that. I need you all to trust me." The room was still, but slowly, people began to nod. The first steps were being taken. He was going to prove to them that he was capable of being the leader they needed. Later that week, the changes Brian had started implementing were small but noticeable. The staff were more engaged, the customers seemed happier, and there was a sense of teamwork in the air that hadn't been there before. But one afternoon, things took an unexpected turn. As Brian was walking through the store, he noticed something strange. A group of customers were standing near the front, looking upset. They were pointing at a display, and the conversation was growing louder. Brian approached cautiously, not sure what he would find. As he neared, one of the customers turned to him and said, "This display isn't what it's supposed to be. It's all wrong." Brian frowned, confused. "What's wrong with it?" The customer shook their head. "This is all outdated. You need to fix it, or I'm taking my business elsewhere." Brian's stomach churned. He had worked so hard to make things right. And now this. He knew this was a test, one of many to come. How would he handle this situation? Would he lose his cool again, or would he prove he was ready to be the leader Danielle was expecting? Brian stood frozen in front of the display, staring at the upset customers. His heart raced in his chest. The pressure of the moment pressed down on him like a heavy weight. He had promised Danielle that he would change, that he would lead with respect. But now, in this moment, could he really follow through? The customer who had spoken first was still pointing at the display, shaking his head. "This is all wrong," the man said, his voice rising. "It's outdated and disorganized. I'm not paying for this." Brian felt a bead of sweat form on his forehead. He couldn't afford to mess this up. He had come so far, but it felt like everything was on the line. This one mistake could undo everything. He glanced around and noticed a few of the staff were watching from a distance, some looking nervous, others looking curious. They were waiting to see how he would handle the situation. He knew their eyes were on him, and he could feel their judgment, even though they weren't saying a word. "Sir," Brian began, trying to keep his voice calm, "I understand your frustration. Let me take a look at this display for you, and I'll make sure we fix it right away." The customer crossed his arms, still frowning. "It's not just about fixing it. It's about how it's been like this for weeks. This is poor management." Brian took a deep breath. He wanted to snap back, to tell the man that he was doing his best, but he knew that wouldn't help. He needed to remain calm, stay in control. He glanced around the store to see if anyone else had noticed, and when he saw a few other customers eyeing the situation, he knew he had to fix it fast. "Let's go through the store and look at everything together," Brian said. His voice was steady, but inside, his mind was racing. He couldn't afford to lose his temper. Not now. Not after everything he had worked for. The customer seemed to hesitate, but finally nodded. "Fine. Lead the way." As they walked through the aisles, Brian pointed out some of the new changes he had made to the store layout. He spoke confidently, despite the nerves building inside him. He needed to show the customer that he was in control, that he knew what he was doing. The customer wasn't entirely convinced, but Brian didn't back down. He apologized for the poor display and promised that it would be fixed immediately. He even offered a small discount on the man's purchase to make up for the inconvenience. By the time they reached the checkout, the customer's attitude had softened. Brian smiled as the man nodded in approval, his frustration easing. "I appreciate you taking the time to fix it," the customer said, his tone much calmer now. "I'll be back again, but you better make sure this place is in better shape next time." "I will," Brian said, his relief almost palpable. "Thank you for your patience." As the customer walked out of the store, Brian felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. He had handled the situation without losing his cool, without snapping. He had learned something important about leadership. It wasn't about being tough or commanding. It was about listening, staying calm, and finding solutions. He had passed the first real test. But even though Brian felt proud of himself, there was a nagging feeling in the back of his mind. This was just the beginning. One situation wasn't enough. He had to prove to Danielle, to his staff, and to himself that he could be the leader they needed. He had a long way to go. Later that day, back in the office, Danielle had asked to meet with Brian. He was nervous, unsure of what she would say. Had she noticed the tension earlier? Did she think he had handled the situation well? He didn't know, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation would determine whether or not he could keep his position. As he walked into her office, Danielle looked up from her desk and gave him a small smile. "Brian, take a seat." He sat down, his hands fidgeting nervously. Danielle studied him for a moment, her gaze calm and collected. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice neutral but curious. Brian took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. "I think it went okay. The customer was upset, but I spoke to him, explained the situation, and we got things worked out. He seemed satisfied by the end." Danielle nodded, her eyes never leaving him. "I saw what happened from my office. I'm proud of you, Brian. You stayed calm, you didn't argue, and you handled the situation professionally. That's the kind of leadership I've been looking for." Brian's heart swelled with pride. He had passed the test, but he knew it wasn't over. This was just one step. He still had so much to prove. But Danielle wasn't finished yet. She stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the store floor below. "You've made some great improvements, but this isn't just about dealing with one customer. It's about setting an example for everyone here. The staff looks up to you, Brian. They need to see that you lead by respect, not fear. They need to know you're someone they can rely on." Brian nodded, his determination growing. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to stop now. "I understand. I'll keep working on it. I won't let you down." Danielle turned back to face him, her expression serious. "I know you won't. But remember, Brian, leadership is more than just fixing problems. It's about being there for your team, supporting them, and helping them grow. You have the potential to be a great leader. Don't waste it." Brian had worked hard to improve, and he could see the results. The store was running smoothly. The staff seemed more engaged, more motivated. He had managed to solve problems without losing his temper, and Danielle had even praised him for the changes he'd made. Yet he knew that the hardest part was still ahead of him. One afternoon, as Brian was walking through the aisles, checking on things and talking to staff, he saw a familiar face near the front of the store. It was the same customer who had complained about the display a few weeks ago. This time, however, he wasn't alone. He had a group of friends with him, all looking at the products, talking loudly, and not looking very happy. Brian felt a knot form in his stomach. He had worked so hard to fix the store, but now this. The pressure was building again. Was this going to be another difficult situation? Before he could approach, one of the other customers turned to him, pointing to the group. "Hey, we need someone to fix this. They're making a scene." Brian took a deep breath. He knew he had to face this head-on. He had come too far to back down now. The old Brian would have just ignored it, let the customers sort things out themselves. But the new Brian had learned something important. He had to take responsibility, even in difficult situations. He walked over to the group, his mind working quickly to figure out how to defuse the situation. The customer from before looked up at him, his eyes cold. Well, look who decided to show up. The manager, right? How's the store doing today?" "Still a mess." Brian forced a smile. "I'm sorry if there's a problem. Let's talk about it and see if we can fix whatever's bothering you." The man shook his head, clearly annoyed. "You should have done this a long time ago. Your store looks like a disaster. I've never seen such poor organization." Brian could feel his frustration rising, but he didn't let it show. "I understand your frustration, and I'm really sorry if you feel that way. I've been working hard with the team to improve everything, and I want to make sure you're happy with your experience today." The customer scoffed. "I doubt anything's going to change here. You've got a lot of work to do if you want me to believe that. Maybe it's time to start looking for a new manager." Brian's heart raced. He couldn't let it slip now. He needed to show him, and the rest of the customers, that he had changed. He had learned how to handle situations like this with patience and professionalism. "I'll take full responsibility for the problems," Brian said calmly. "But I want to make sure we solve this. Let me walk you through the store and see what we can do to improve things right now." At first, the customer hesitated, but seeing that Brian wasn't backing down, he agreed. The walkthrough. Brian spent the next 15 minutes walking through the store with the customer and his group. He pointed out the changes that had already been made, explained the store's plans for the future, and even asked for their feedback on how to make things better. It wasn't easy. The customer and his group were critical, pointing out every little mistake and every detail they didn't like. But Brian stayed calm. He took notes on their complaints and promised to look into fixing everything. Finally, they'd made their way back to the front of the store. The customer seemed a little quieter now, his tone less harsh. "I'll admit," the man said slowly, "I didn't think you could handle this. But you've been patient. You didn't try to fight me or make excuses. I respect that." Brian felt a small wave of relief. It wasn't perfect, but he had diffused the situation without letting it get out of control. "Thank you for giving me the chance to show you that we're working on it," Brian said. "I hope you'll come back and see the improvements we make." The customer nodded, finally smiling. "I'll think about it. Maybe this store isn't as bad as I thought." As they walked out of the store, Brian felt a mix of pride and exhaustion. He had handled it well, but he also knew that this was just one customer. He couldn't let his guard down. He still had so much to prove. Later that evening, as Brian was wrapping up his shift, Danielle called him into her office. He had no idea what to expect. Had she heard about the situation with the customer? Would she be disappointed with how he had handled it? He was nervous, but he walked in with his head held high. Danielle was sitting behind her desk, flipping through some papers. She looked up when he entered. "Brian, sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. He sat down, his hands resting on his knees. Danielle studied him for a moment before speaking. "I've been hearing some great things about you, Brian," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I've been watching how you've been handling things with the staff and the customers. I'm impressed with the progress you've made." Brian couldn't help but smile. He had worked hard, and it felt good to hear that it was paying off. "Thanks, Danielle. I've been trying my best." But Danielle's expression grew serious. "There's still something important we need to talk about. The store is improving, but we have one big challenge ahead." Brian's stomach tightened. What did she mean? What challenge could be bigger than the one he had just faced with the angry customer? Danielle leaned forward slightly. "I've been thinking about your future here. You've made progress, but there's one thing I need to see before I can trust you fully." Brian's mind raced. "What is it?" Danielle paused for a moment. "I need you to lead the next big project. I want you to take charge of the upcoming store rebranding. You'll work with the marketing team, the designers, and the staff to completely revamp our image. It's a huge task, and it's going to require everything you've learned. It's going to be a test of your leadership skills." Brian felt the weight of her words. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Could he really handle a challenge this big? Could he prove that he had truly changed? "I'll do it," Brian said, his voice full of determination. "I won't let you down." Danielle smiled. "I know you won't. But remember, Brian, this is the ultimate test. If you want to prove you're ready for bigger things, you'll have to show that you can lead on a much larger scale. Are you ready?" Brian nodded, his heart racing with excitement and fear. This was his chance. The ultimate challenge was here, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. The pressure of the rebranding project weighed heavily on Brian's shoulders. Danielle had given him the chance to prove himself, but the challenge was bigger than anything he had faced before. The store's image was everything, and now it was up to him to make sure everything went smoothly. If he failed, there was no telling what could happen. For the next few weeks, Brian worked tirelessly. He attended meetings with the marketing team, reviewed design concepts, and spoke with the staff to make sure they were on board with the new changes. Every day, it felt like he was walking a tightrope, balancing between the expectations of Danielle and the needs of his team. But the more he worked, the more confident he became. However, things weren't always as easy as they seemed. Some team members weren't fully on board with the changes. They resisted new ideas, afraid of how the store might change. Brian could feel the tension building. He knew he had to keep everyone together, but it wasn't easy. The pressure was getting to him, and sometimes he felt like he was losing control. One afternoon, as Brian was going over some design proofs in his office, he received a call from one of the designers. "Brian, we have a problem," the designer said, their voice tense. "The new logo isn't going to work. The colors aren't printing right, and the design doesn't match what we were aiming for." Brian's heart sank. This was a disaster. The new logo was supposed to be the cornerstone of the rebranding effort. If it wasn't ready in time, everything would fall apart. "I'll take care of it," Brian said, trying to stay calm. He hung up the phone and immediately walked to the design team's office. His mind raced, and his hands felt cold with nervous energy. This was a setback they couldn't afford, and it was all on him to fix it. When he arrived, the designers were gathered around a table, looking over the rejected proofs. They looked up when he entered. "What's going on?" Brian asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "We've tried everything," one of the designers said, frustration clear in their voice. "But the colors keep coming out wrong. We don't have enough time to fix it." Brian could feel the weight of the situation pushing down on him. He couldn't let this project fail now. Not after everything he had worked for. "What if we adjust the design slightly?" he suggested. "We can tweak the colors and make it fit with the new theme. It doesn't have to be perfect, just close enough to get the message across." The designers exchanged uncertain glances, but they nodded. "It's worth a shot," one of them said. Brian worked with the design team for hours, making adjustments to the logo and testing different colors. The clock was ticking. He could feel the deadline approaching like a storm, and the pressure was growing. But he refused to give up. By late evening, they had a design that, while not perfect, was much closer to what they needed. It wasn't exactly what they had planned, but it was good enough to move forward. Brian smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. They had done it, but he knew the hardest part was still ahead. The presentation. The day of the big presentation finally arrived. Brian stood in front of the marketing team, the designers, and Danielle. His nerves were on edge, but he was determined to show them that he was ready for this. He had put in hours of work, and he wasn't about to let it all fall apart now. Danielle stood at the back of the room, watching him closely. Her eyes were steady, but Brian could feel the pressure. This was his moment to prove everything he had been working for. The room was silent as he clicked through the slides, showing them the new designs, the changes to the store layout, and the marketing strategies they had developed. Every eye was on him. When he reached the logo, he paused. It wasn't perfect, but it was strong. He had confidence in it, and he hoped the team would see it too. "This is the new logo," Brian said, his voice steady, but with a hint of nervousness. "It's not exactly what we planned, but it's a step in the right direction. It reflects where we're going as a company and how we want to be seen by our customers." He watched as the room waited for feedback. The designers exchanged glances, and the marketing team looked over the new designs carefully. There was a brief silence before Danielle spoke up. "It's different," she said, her voice calm. "It's not what we expected, but it's bold. I think it captures the essence of what we're trying to do here." Brian let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He had passed the first part of the test, but he wasn't finished yet. One by one, the team began to give their feedback. Some had concerns about the design, but most of the comments were positive. They could see the potential, even if the logo wasn't exactly what they had originally imagined. Brian worked with them, answering questions and making sure they felt heard. He kept his calm, even as doubts swirled in his mind. He had to believe in this, even when things weren't perfect. When the presentation was over, Danielle stood up and walked over to him. She smiled, her expression thoughtful. "You did well today, Brian," she said. "I know there were some challenges, but you handled them with grace. I'm impressed." Brian felt a weight lift off his chest. He had done it. He had faced the biggest challenge of his career, and he had made it through. But he knew that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. This was just the beginning. The big reveal. A few weeks later, the rebranding was finally complete. The new logo was in place, the store had been redesigned, and the marketing campaign was ready to launch. Brian stood outside the store, looking at the new signage. It was a huge change, but it felt like the right one. This was the new beginning for the store, and he was proud to have played a part in it. As customers began to filter into the store, Brian could see the excitement on their faces. They were intrigued by the new look, the new feel. This was what he had been working for. Danielle approached him, her smile warm. "You did it," she said. "You've proven yourself. I knew you could do it, Brian. This is only the start." Brian nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "Thank you, Danielle. I couldn't have done it without your support." The store was thriving, and Brian knew that this was just the beginning of his journey. There were still challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them. He had learned so much, not just about leadership, but about perseverance, about staying true to his vision, and about trusting the people around him. And as he watched customers walk into the store, he knew that he had truly become the leader he had always hoped to be.